The time has finally come. The Americans are at war with England. Now, I know you're looking forward to talking about heroism, battles, and George Washington showing the Redcoats who's boss. Before we can talk about that, we need to take a look at both sides. First thing you need to know is that the Americans are the underdogs. They're the mighty ducks of this story. I mean, if you were to look at both sides on paper and had to guess who would win, your money better be on the British. Really, they were setting themselves up for failure. So, how did they win? Well, first, let's take a look at their strengths and their weaknesses. Because the colonists believed so strongly in their cause, they had a willingness to give their lives, resulting in them fighting harder and more passionately. They had a very strong commander. You may have heard of him, this guy, George Washington. No big deal. They had the home field advantage, so they knew the land. But most importantly, they just had to keep fighting. As long as they kept fighting, the British would have to keep fighting, and the British didn't really want that. But they also had some weaknesses, some big weaknesses. They didn't have a lot of men, or weapons, or a navy. I told you they were big. Because their job wasn't a soldier, many of them had family obligations that forced them to leave the fighting, especially during crop season. They had very little training, almost no discipline, and they were dealing with a lot of opposition from the Loyalists who weren't too keen on this war. See what I mean? Luckily, though, the colonists had a secret weapon up their sleeves. But more on that later. Now, the British had it going on. They had matching uniforms, fancy weapons, and a ton of money. Let's take a look at how those strengths and weaknesses break down. The British had professionally trained soldiers, people whose job it was to fight, and they had a lot of them. Not only that, but for many of these soldiers, this wasn't their first war. They had a ton of military experience. They had a lot of money and a lot of superior weapons. But most of all, they had one of, if not the, most powerful and biggest navy in the world. Side note, remember this. Whoever controls the water controls the war. Now, the British were invincible. The war took place on the other side of the world, so it took time and money to send troops. Communication was slow and very expensive. They didn't know the land. They were well trained, but they didn't know how to fight against this crazy surprise fighting that the colonists were so good at. But the British's biggest weakness was their main objective. They had to defeat the colonial army. As long as the colonists kept fighting and being rebellious, the British would have to keep sending troops and spending more money. Now, the strengths are worthless without strategies and tactics, the building blocks of war. Strategy is the planning, coordination, and general direction of military operations to meet overall political and military objectives. Tactics implement strategy by short-term decision-making on the movement of troops and the employment of weapons on the battlefield. That sounded kind of complicated. Here, check out this equation. In battles, you have people who vary in amount and skill, and tools like weapons and communication. They determine your tactics, and your tactics vary based on your overall strategy. Still confused? Think about it like this. Tactics is the art of using troops in the battlefield. Strategy is the art of using battles to win a war. Thanks, Carl! Let's try some real-world examples. Let's say you're playing college football for, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Your ultimate goal is to win the NCAA football championship. When you're playing offense, your goal is to score points. In order to maximize the amount of points you can score, your offensive strategy is to prolong your possession of the ball to prevent the opponent from scoring more points, especially if that opposition takes a really long time to score. Your tactics in order to achieve this will be the different plays you will employ, which will depend on the players on your team. The players will determine whether you can use a running play, a passing play, and the type of formations you'll use. Let's say you're a pretty popular girl. Adorable. She's sassy. I like it. Okay, so let's say your ultimate goal is to be prom queen. Your strategy to achieve that goal is to be boosting your own popularity and to diminish the social standings of your opponents. All of them. Especially Brittany. She knows why. In order to achieve this strategy, you might want to employ some tactics like dating the most popular guy in school, like
Chad Bradwell. Ladies.
Oh, Chad! Not to be confused with Brad Chadwell. He's a dork. Or maybe starting some nasty rumors that may cause doubt amongst voters. Yeah, that ought to do it. Alright, let's take a look at one last example. This time, it's actually related to the war, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Let's take a look at the British perspective first. The people on the British side were well trained and numerous. That, combined with their large amounts of superior weapons, allowed them to employ their traditional tactic of line fighting and volley firing, meaning they lined up, fired their guns, and reloaded. This tactic was used to help accomplish their goal of stopping the rebellion and containing it to Massachusetts. Given the outcome, this was a tactical draw because while they lost fewer men, they were forced to retreat. Because of this, Lexington and Concord was also a strategic failure for the British, because the results of this battle did not help them accomplish their strategy of stopping the rebellion. Quite the contraire. As for the Americans, it was slightly different. They had fewer men and next to no training. They had fewer weapons, but they also had rifles, which were slightly more accurate. Given these factors, the tactics the Americans used were guerrilla warfare, the art of ambushing your enemy, fire upon them, and retreating when needed. This tactic was used to accomplish their overall strategy of preserving the colonial army through mobility, harassment of the British, and strategic retreat. Given this outcome, this was also a tactical draw for the Americans because while they lost more troops, they did force the British to retreat. But it was a strategic victory because they successfully preserved the colonial army. Yay, America! But this was just one battle in a series of many. Both sides would experience highs and lows. Strategies would change and new tactics would be learned. But in the end, there would only be one winner.
Won't you come see about me?